Good afternoon. It's March 20th on Sunday. Well, that works.
Okay.
Thank you so much for participating.
Well, thank you all for asking me. Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. Good afternoon. Today is Sunday, March 20th, 2022, and we have Dr. Maggie Thurmond-Dorsey here with us on behalf of the Lucy Craft Laney Museum of Black History, Mustard Seed Video Production, and the Watson Brown Foundation. We are here today to talk with Dr. Maggie Thurmond-Dorsey, and we would like to know, what was your upbringing like?
Wow. That's a very profound question. I think I had a wonderful upbringing. I was raised by my parents, Earl and Maxine Thurmond, and my community of family and friends. We lived within a mile of both of my grandparents, my maternal and paternal grandparents. I grew up in Turpin Hill, which was a section of the Augusta community, and I grew up in Trinity CME Church in Augusta on 8th and Taylor Streets. And my parents, my grandparents, my church family, elementary school, I went to Silas X. Floyd on Florence Street, and I went there for 7 years, from the first grade through the 7th grade. Before that, I went to Bethlehem Community Center for kindergarten, and before that, I went to Miss Cobb's daycare. But then after Silas X. Floyd, I went to T.W. Josie for 2 years. And after that, well, my family moved. We actually moved on May 11th, 1970. And that was the day of the riot. And that was the day they had planned to move, and that was the day we moved. But we moved to Oakland Avenue, which is, we describe it as on the hill. And I had to transfer schools, and I went to West Side under protest, I must add. But but my time at West Side ended up being a great time. And then after West Side, I went to the Medical College of Georgia, and I was in the generic nursing program. That type program doesn't exist anymore, but that was where they would admit high school students, high school graduates, and it was a 4-year nursing program. And I took my core curricula from Augusta College, and I took my nursing curriculum from the Medical College of Georgia. But this was all intertwined during that 4 years. And so when I finished, I had a Bachelor of Science in nursing. And then I started working at University Hospital as a new nurse. And then I went to work at the Medical College of Georgia, the Maternity and Infant Care Project. And I did that for 2.5 years. And then I decided to go back to school. And I got my master's in nursing. And then I started working at the University of South Carolina, Aiken, as a part-time clinical instructor. But that wasn't what I had planned to do. I had planned, when I got my master's, to work as a clinical nurse specialist in the Augusta hospitals. But I couldn't get a job doing what I wanted to do. That job wasn't available to me. They didn't hire me to do that. So one of my professors, her name was Dr. Catherine Glanville. She was an African-American professor at the Medical College of Georgia. And I remember when I talked to her about my frustration, in terms of not getting the job that, I felt like I was trained and educated to do, and what I really wanted to do. She says, well, why don't you apply over there at USC Aiken? She said, they need some folks like this. I said, oh, okay. So I applied to work as a part-time clinical instructor, as I said, and I also continued to work at University Hospital part-time as a PRN, just as you need nurse. And so I did that for that first year. And so they were pleased with my performance as a clinical instructor. And I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed my interactions with the students. So then they, at USC Aiken School of Nursing, or was the Department of Nursing at that point, they encouraged me to apply for a full-time job, which I did. So I applied for a full-time job, and I got it as an assistant professor of nursing at USC Aiken. But this wasn't exactly what I had planned for my life. I had planned to be a clinical nurse specialist, but that wasn't the way it worked out. So I started in 1981 as a full-time clinical assistant professor, and I retired in 2011. But there were a lot of things that went on in between when I started and when I retired. And then even after I retired, I worked for them for another 7 years as a part-time clinical instructor. So I ended the way I began, part-time. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, wow, there's so much in there
Mm-hmm.
that I want to hear more from you about.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you if we could rewind back to either adolescence or even childhood.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember any particular people that were influential in your life, or who do you remember even any special moments that you consider to be a major turning points in your life that guided you to the path that you're on?
Wow. Well, I think my parents and my grandparents had a very important impact on decisions that I made. Some of those were unconscious, and some of those were deliberate. My parents were educators, as I don't know if I mentioned that or not, and I always said I didn't want to be a teacher like them. I did not want to do what my parents did. I always, from the time that I can remember, said I wanted to be a nurse. And my grandmother, who I'm named for, her name was Maggie Tyler Wilson. And I'm Maggie Thurmond-Dorsey. Well, she worked as a nurse. She was not a registered nurse or a practical nurse, but she worked in nursing. And I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house on Rosalie Street. And she was organized, and she was stern, and she wore beautiful, clean white shoes, and she loved nursing. And I can remember spending many a day in her den, and her sharing with me some of her experiences with her patients and the doctors and the other nurses. And she just loved what she did. And I think that had a strong impact with me to want to be like my grandmama, to be that strong person who enjoyed and loved, her profession. But it's ironic that I ended up combining what my grandmother did as a nurse with what my parents did in terms of becoming a teacher, a nurse educator. So those people, my parents, Maxine and Earl, and then Big Mama, that's what we call Maggie Wilson, we called, and then her husband was Big Daddy, Henry Wilson. He worked as a porter at the Richmond Hotel, and he had a very quiet um, affect, but very kind. And then my other grandparents were James. He was Reverend James Ramsey Thurmond. He was a preacher, and his wife Alberta. Those were my paternal grandparents, and I think they had an impact also, just in terms of their caring and their activity in the church. So like I said, I lived within a mile of both grandparents. And when my parents were working on their master's degree, and back during that time, because of segregation, they were not able to pursue a master's in Georgia. So they went to New York University during the summers to pursue their master's. So when they would go to New York for the summers, we would spend our days at my paternal grandparents, and then at night we were with my maternal grandparents. And so it made for a fun experience growing up, being nurtured by both sides of my family, and also being influenced by both sides of my family.
Would you say that in the community it was common for people to live in close proximity with family members?
I think so. I think during that time, that was just the way it was. And both my parents were from Augusta, and with some other families, who are military families, they move around the country and the world, so they don't have the opportunity to live near their families. But because my parents were not connected to the military, and they stayed in Augusta, they stayed near their parents. It was within a mile. But then after they decided we needed a bigger house, they moved out of that neighborhood.
Speaking of Augusta,
Mm-hmm.
would you mind sharing a bit more about how the city was when you were growing up? Because earlier you mentioned that you all actually moved from the Laney Walker Bethlehem area the day of the 1970 Augusta riot.
Right.
Do you mind sharing a bit about maybe from when you were born up to the riot, how your observation of how the city was?
Well, as a child, it was full of love. And for the most part, up until, well, for the most part, my life was all African American. I lived in an African American neighborhood. We went to an African American church, and so all of my associates and friends were African American. It wasn't until I think I was a second or third grade that my parents enrolled me in ballet. And this was at the Augusta Ballet with Ron Colton. And Mr. Colton was from New York. And he brought his New York ideas and ideals to Augusta. And he formed this new ballet company. And I don't know what went on behind the scenes, but I know I, along with several other African American young ladies, were enrolled in classes at the Augusta Ballet with Mr. Ron Colton. And I think that was probably my first encounter with Caucasian kids. I think. I can't think of any situation before that. I don't remember it being negative. I don't remember, it's just that, there were white girls and black girls, and we were all in the ballet studio learning how to plie and jeté and do, all of the different steps in terms of ballet. And then I think after that, my parents enrolled me in various classes at the Y. And this was the Y on Green Street, which doesn't exist anymore. And I can remember taking sewing classes and modeling classes. What else did I take down there? Those two classes I remember. And again, those were integrated classes. So I think my parents were very intentional about wanting me to be exposed to cultures outside of my culture, the culture that I was growing up in, just in terms of some of the activities that I was enrolled in. I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely. Well, were you confused by the riot, or did you know of the tension that was present, even though it might not have been your experience per se?
Well, very honestly, I do remember the aftermaths of the riot. And I have a memory, but it's not been confirmed by anybody else in my family who's still around. But I remember when we were moving on that day, I remember being on the passenger side of a truck. And I remember whoever was driving the truck that had household goods in it, I remember them stopping us to find out where we were going and who that person was. And I thought it was my little brother, and I've asked him about it, but he's 5 years younger than I am. And he said no, he doesn't remember that experience. So it was somebody else, or either it was a figment of my imagination. But I remember that. And then I remember after the riot, riding through some areas of downtown and remember seeing buildings that were destroyed, that sort of thing. It wasn't really until I read more about the riots that I learned what had precipitated the events. So honestly, as a child, I didn't know the cause. I really didn't have an idea about what really was going on.
Thank you so much. I think that your career trajectory and progress is so remarkable, and I would love to hear more about your experiences within the field. I also want to get to your book, but would you mind sharing um, what your earlier days in your career were like, and maybe some choices you made, or how you, being that it wasn't your first choice of a path, how you made the most of it, and what it was like in the institution that you ended up joining. Can you share a little more details about that?
I'll try. Um, well, when I started teaching at USC Aiken, as I mentioned, I started out as a clinical nurse instructor. And basically what that meant was that I was in the hospital with the students. And the first hospital that I was teaching in was St. Joseph Hospital. And so I would meet the students and facilitate their learning in the OB area, which was the delivery area, but also the postpartum area. And I would also go with them in the newborn nursery. And that was a really fun, exciting place to be with students because having babies, is just it's a normal, it's usually a healthy, and it's a fun, exciting area of healthcare to be in. So that was where I started out with students, and that was because I had the experience of working in the maternity and infant care project at the Medical College of Georgia. But actually, my master's is in adult nursing, which is what we call med-surg or medical surgical nursing. So after a while, the Department of the School of Nursing decided to be in accordance with my educational training. I really should have been with students in med-surg nursing and not OB nursing. So that's where I started working with students. Again, I started out as a clinical instructor, going with them to the Medical College of Georgia. It used to be called Talmadge Hospital. It's had different names, and taking students to University Hospital. And we would be on various units, and they would provide care to patients. And usually I would have 8 students, and each one of them would have 1 or 2 patients that they were providing care for, and my job was to supervise their care. And their care included giving patients medicine, teaching the patients maybe various treatments. I had to co-sign all of their charting. So it was busy when I had 8 students, 1 instructor, and I had to be in each room when anything intricate or was being performed. And when every medicine was administered, I had to be there to be sure that we had the right patient at the right time, the right dose, that everything was right. So I did that. So then, as I continued at the School of Nursing, then my duties expanded from just being a clinical instructor to actually being a classroom instructor. And one of the experiences that I think was pivotal in my development as an educator was I had really not taught in the classroom much. It had always been at the clinical site. So I was given the assignment to teach a particular unit in the classroom. And I prepared by reading the book and writing my notes, and then also preparing test questions for the students. And I recall my supervising faculty member was there in the back of the classroom. So after, and I thought I know I had prepared, and I was, I thought I'd prepared very well. Well, anyway, she told me she wanted to see me afterwards. And I went into her office, and I'll never forget. She ripped me up from top to bottom and told me how terrible my lecture was. It was elementary. It was not in depth. She told me that the questions that I had written that corresponded to the lecture were all knowledge level. And it was like, wow. I mean, that just took the floor from up under me. So it was a 2-part lecture, and I can remember that was maybe on a Wednesday. And then I was to lecture again on the following Monday. So, and then Thursday and Friday were clinical days. Those were days when I was going to be with students in the hospital. So that whole time from that Wednesday until that Monday, then I was preparing. I mean, I was rereading the material that I had read, and then I was looking up articles, and I was rewriting the corresponding questions for the students. And I was feeling very stressed, because I never had a supervisor at any point that I could remember, being in school in terms of just ripping up a performance like that. So anyway, I prepared, and I'll never forget that Monday. I went into class. Of course, I was nervous and everything, and that supervising faculty member didn't show up, and so I was disappointed. So how can you? It was I was very disappointed, but I decided maybe she was right. Maybe my lecture was not what it should have been. Maybe it was not deep enough. Maybe my the questions that I wrote were not at the level of comprehension and application and analysis. Maybe they weren't. But I decided at that point that I was going to take the courses that I needed so that if I ever got evaluated again, I could say I chose to do it this way. So, because my master's was as a clinical nurse specialist, not as an educator. So what I did was I signed up for a course at the Medical College of Georgia. It was as a postmaster's in curriculum development, and then I went to Augusta. I know it was Augusta College or Augusta State at that point, and I took the course Test and Measurements, and then I took the Adult as a Learner, and seems like there was another course that I took. But these were courses that were designed to enhance, to prepare nurse educators. And see, I had not had those. So I took those. And so I think that was a pivotal career opportunity. And it always reminds me, I think there's a verse in the Bible that says something like, they meant it for your bad, but God meant it for your good. Well, I think that that experience was really for my good, because it helped me to know really what it means to be an educator, and to be prepared as an educator. And so even though it was a rough experience, it was a growing experience.
Wow, it says so much about your character, that just the way that you responded to that, and you pursued, further development and training. You didn't quit. You didn't give up.
No, I was angry, very, and my feelings were hurt. I'm going to be very honest with you, but but I am thankful that I took that direction from that experience.
And so is the community. You've gone on to have to touch so many lives and teach so many. In light of the particular field that you're in, I imagine that it's heavily saturated with women, with females.
Absolutely.
And so, can you tell me about what might have sparked your interest in advocating for diversity, gender-wise, in your field?
Thank you. It's a great question. Well, in 2002, I decided to go back to school and work on my doctorate. And I was pursuing an EDD in educational leadership from Georgia Southern, and I had to develop a dissertation topic. And I remember my professor saying, "You want to think, look around you, and look around you, to look for a topic or an idea. And what I realized at USC Aiken was that we had it was predominantly women, predominantly white women, but we would also have a large number of African American women who were in our program. But we would have a few African American men who would apply and who would start, but most of them didn't complete the program. So that spurred my interest, and that spurred the direction of my dissertation research in terms of, um, why did we have so few African American men entering and completing our nursing program? But also, was this something that was unique to the University of South Carolina, Aiken? So that was how I actually got started with my interest in African American men in nursing.
Would you, do you think things have changed since that time?
Oh, uh, I think they have changed. We have more men and more African American men in nursing because we absolutely need men in nursing. And when I say that, many people will agree, oh, yes, yes, we need men in nursing. But their thought is that we need them because of their muscles. And that's not why we need African American men or men in nursing. We need them for their perspective and that they bring to the profession. We need them for their ideas in providing quality patient care. We need them because the patients that we care for are not all women. Many of them are men, and many times patients relate better or feel more comfortable when their caregivers look like them or that look like them. So I think if we look at the statistics, there there has been an increase in the number of men and an increase in African American men, but only a small number. And it's still not at the numbers or the statistics that we would like to see. And I can't tell you what those statistics are right now off the top of my head, but I know that I've looked at them, and they're still not where we would like to see them.
Can I ask you if, while you were pursuing all of your research
Mm-hmm.
for this particular degree, for that degree, did you have a supportive group of peers? Did you ever meet any resistance, or um, how were people receptive to your advocacy for more males in the field?
Um, that's a good question. Um, I don't think that I can recall any real resistance to the idea of increasing the diversity in nursing. I do recall though when I was in front of my dissertation committee that one of the topics that gave my committee a lot of pause and caused me a lot of discomfort was the factor that I mentioned was that there was a disparity in healthcare, and this was back in 2005, at the point of me defending my dissertation, that when I said that there was a disparity in healthcare in that African Americans do not receive the level and the quality of care that Caucasians do. And that was not received well. That was not accepted by my committee at that time. And I'll never forget, I had to defend for 2.5 hours. It was and that wasn't the whole topic that they were grilling me about, but that was a topic that now I think that we're seeing has been expounded upon, that there is a real disparity in healthcare for African Americans. So I would say that would be the one pointer, or the one area, the one place that my topic received some blockage, or I'm not sure if I'm answering. Okay.
How would you attribute that resistance or that pushback? What would you attribute that to? Because I know that the field of medicine is still male dominated, even if there are within medicine some areas where women are. There's more women working in that particular corner of medicine. It's still a heavily male dominated industry. So do you think any of that was influencing the pushback, or racism or sexism or anything that wasn't evidence-based? Can you attribute that heavy pushback to anything? Do you have any thoughts on why you might have gotten so much pushback on that?
Well,
because the evidence proves you correct.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure it did then.
Well, I think the evidence has become more widespread and more widely distributed now than it was in 2005. So I think that with my dissertation committee, there was a level of ignorance regarding the statistics, the reality of healthcare at that point, that now it would be undisputed. Now it is seen, it is known as a fact. Back then, they didn't see it as a fact. They thought it was an opinion that I was voicing. And that was where the pushback came. They thought that I was including an opinion and not a fact in my dissertation. We got past that, hallelujah, and I got my degree, but I had to go back and do some more, not research, but data collection, not on my particular research topic, but gather some more information to support what I was saying. And so they signed me off, and but I do remember that. I'm glad you asked that question. I hadn't thought about that in a while.
Thank you for your perseverance, because it really it convinces me all the more that we're able to do what we're able to do today because of everyone who's gone before us, and at least push things forward in some kind of way, because like you said, it's more widely circulated now. It's more, even the conversation happens more often, I'm sure,
right
now.
Right.
But I wish you hadn't received all of that pushback when you.
I do too.
I think this is a great time to talk about your patient advocacy and how you, maybe some of your experiences also influenced you to become more of an advocate on the other end of healthcare for the patients. Can you go into that?
Thank
I am truly hoping that I don't have this wrong, but you do have a book, right?
I do. I do. I've so as I mentioned, I finished Georgia Southern with an EDD, and out when I was working on my dissertation, I was gathering information about the lack of African American men in nursing. So as I mentioned, I graduated. So then I had gathered this data and done this research about the the scarcity of African American men in nursing. So then I thought, so what do I do with this information? You know, what's normally done in academia is you write articles and you make presentations to your peers and the academic community about your topic. You know, you become an expert in that topic. Well, I had been teaching for over 25 years, and that wasn't something that sounded exciting to me in terms of to get on the circuit of writing scholarly articles and making scholarly presentations to my peers about African American men in nursing. I decided that I wanted to write a children's book because my idea was to hopefully, if some little boys or some little girls could read a book that had pictures in it of characters that look like them, that maybe it might plant a seed that it's okay for men and little boys to grow up to be nurses. So that was what I did. And I think writing a children's book, that seed was planted in me many years back because when I was in college, I had worked in the Augusta Library, worked there for 2.5 years. And then when my sons were growing up, that was one of the activities that was very important, and that was reading to them. So I wrote my first children's book, and it's called My Hero, My Dad, the Nurse. And it's about a little boy named Michael David Daniels who wants to be a nurse like his dad. And in writing the book, I tried to incorporate in a child-friendly manner some of the things that I had learned in my research about men in nursing. And also kind of incorporate in the book some of the misconceptions about men in nursing. And one of the misconceptions that people had, particularly in the past, I don't know if we see that as much now, and that was that men who enter nursing were effeminate. They were not masculine. And so I dealt with that in the book, where one of Michael David Daniels' friends calls him a sissy because he wants to be a nurse. And it's really funny. Anytime I read the book to children, they get quiet when I say that. But what happens in the book, Michael David Daniels is saddened because they call him that name. And he shares that with his mom. And his mom tells him that was not nice. They shouldn't call him that. And she tells him maybe they've never met a man that's a nurse. So that's the first book. And after I wrote the first book, then I think I got the writing fever. And so then I wrote a second book in the series. And it's called My Hero, My Dad, the Nurse Played Football. And this second book, again, is a child-friendly book about a little boy, Michael David Daniels, who wants to be a nurse like his dad. But it's dealing with the issue that Michael David Daniels wants to play football, but his mom doesn't want him to play football. She's afraid that he'll get hurt. Well, this realistic fictional children's story is really based on maybe my life with my sons. When they were little, they wanted to play football, and their mom was afraid for them to play football because she was afraid they'd get hurt. But it was their dad and the other men in my life who convinced me that it was okay. And that's what happens to Michael David Daniels in this story. His dad comes to his defense and tells him that, yes, he played football when he was a boy, and he got bumped and bruised. But look at him now. He's a registered nurse. So that was the second book. And again, I still had this writing fever. So I wrote the third and final book in the little series of My Hero, My Dad, the Nurse. And the final book is My Hero, My Dad, the Nurse Knocked Out Cancer. And I wrote this book and dedicated it to the memory of my dad. Now, my dad wasn't a nurse, he was an educator. But my dad died at the age of 53 of colon cancer. And this was in 1985. The book is really not about cancer. It's about promoting colonoscopies as a way of preventing cancer, because through colonoscopy, then the polyps can be detected if they are there and then removed, and thereby knocking out cancer. So those are the three books in my little children's book series, My Hero, My Dad, the Nurse.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing more about that. I know that you mentioned that some children really, you mentioned the response that they have to the section of Michael being teased. Can you share more about the reception or the responses in general to your books, either one of them?
Well, personally, I think that they are warmly received. And I've read them to a variety of children in a lot of different schools and age groups, and even in different schools around the country when I've been given the opportunity. And I think the children have been very receptive. It's usually fun at the end. I'll ask them some questions, and I'll ask them, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And I get a variety of answers. A few will say they want to be a nurse. Many of them want to be firefighters and policemen and, that sort of thing. But I remember I had an experience many years ago. This was shortly after I first wrote the book. And so I had copies of the book in the trunk of my car. And so my husband and I were riding down, I think we were on Morgan Road in Augusta, Georgia. And there was a car that was stopped on the side of the road. And long story short, a lady in a van had a flat tire. And she had 2 or 3 children in the car. So we stopped, and my husband asked the lady, did she need some help? And she said, well, I've got a flat tire, and I don't know how to change a tire, and I've got kids in the car. So what we did was the kids got in the car with me, and he pursued to change her tire. So, it takes a little bit of time, and they were a little antsy and that sort of thing. So I said, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll get my book from the back of the trunk, and I'll read my story to the children, while this is going on. And I'll never forget, after I read the story and the children sat there and they listened, and the little boy told me, he said, and I decided that I was going to give them the copy of the book that I had read to them. And so the little boy who was who I read the story to, he said, I want you to put in there 2 and let's just say his name was Tyrone. It probably wasn't Tyrone because it's been a long time. He said, say to Tyrone. And my dad is, and I can't remember what he told me his daddy did, but he wanted me to put in there to Tyrone and then put what his daddy did. And so what that said to me was this made this little boy proud of his dad. And that's one of the other purposes of my books. It's not, it is to promote nursing with African Americans and African American men, but it's also to highlight the importance of dads in children's lives. Because in the story we talk about, the dad might be a policeman or a fireman, or the dad might be a street sweeper, or he might work in a circus. Those are different professions that the dad might have. But this little boy wanted me to put to Tyrone, whose dad was whatever it was that I don't remember what he was. But so I felt really good about that because it made him proud of his dad and what his dad did. And I think that's one of the other things that I think is important is for us to foster children's pride in their parents and parents' pride in pursuing honest careers, whatever they are, in terms of supporting their children toward adulthood.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thurmond-Dorsey. If you could close with what kind of legacy or impact you're working so hard to leave, I think that would be wonderful.
Wow, what kind of that's a well, I want to leave a legacy of being kind, of being kind.
It's so needed in this world. Is there any advice or wisdom you'd like to share with those entering the field or those who are very new to it, since you are now an expert?
I'm now a retiree. Well, nursing is a marvelous, wonderful career. And it has many opportunities, but it's not an easy profession. And I would tell anybody who's entering it, I salute you. And just remember that it's a hard career, but it's a needed career. And just always remember to be kind.
Thank you so, so much, Dr. Maggie Thurmond-Dorsey. We so appreciate your work, your life, your voice. And is there anything else that you would like to share before we conclude? Anything you'd like to say?
I would like to thank you for choosing me to share some of my story, and I hope that it in some way inspires someone else. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm sure it will.